Is a broad introduction, an introduction into one of the main areas. Psychology as a science, and then an introduction into behaviorism. So what we're going to be looking at today and trying to understand is what is the scientific method, and it's an important concept to get your head around, why psychology is a science, and how it acts as the evidence base for counseling. Okay, we're going to look at a little bit at the history, but more importantly, we're going to look at the core concepts in behaviorism. So the first half is a whistle-stop tour, historically, and the second half of the lecture is on behaviorism. So each lecture, I will give you, you'll see a slide saying what the objectives are for this lecture stroke seminar. Up to you to take notes. Okay, these slides are all available on New Learning, so you don't have to write down the content. You have to be smart in what you put down. Write down questions, ideas you have about it, things that are unclear, or something I might say extra that's not on the slide that you think, oh, I want to make a note of that. It's not about taking notes, it's about making notes. Okay, so you don't write everything that I say down, that's old school student behavior. So it's about making a note about that, because you can come back to these slides. The content is there on New Learning for you already. So you don't have to try and copy it all down. Think about what's being said. So psychology comes from the Greek psycho and logos, which is the study of the mind. And psychology is defined as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. The emphasis being around the scientific study. And if you see that logo, that's the logo for psychology. Okay. So counseling is a purposeful private conversation from one person to another who has a problem, and a willingness of another person to help them fix that. Okay? That's quite different from the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So counseling is not psychology. Psychology is not counseling. They inform each other, but they're not the same thing. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior. It's not about helping people. That information is used by the helping professions to help people. By understanding when X happens, Y results, we can use that as counselors. So we know if a person is involved in a mugging, they will suffer certain psychological trauma and consequences. And so we use that to inform the purposeful private conversation, because that's what we're having. It's a particular kind of conversation. So it's important to know that difference. But then why is psychology regarded as a science and counseling isn't? Counseling is not regarded as a science by most psychology people. They think we're all too wishy-washy and touchy-feely. Okay? So psychology is an objective and systematic study that is aimed to describe, explain, predict, and control behavior. So they're standing as the outsider, looking at things in a very structured manner to try and make sense of the world, to describe it, what's happening, to explain why it happens, to be able to predict behavior or control behavior as and when it happens. So psychology is a much more rigorous and much more focused approach than counseling. Counseling is this conversation you're having with another person, this engagement with the other. It's not objective It's not necessarily systematic, and we're not trying to control behavior necessarily, but we are trying to understand and work with that behavior. So, where does all of this come from? This is a quick whistle-stop tour. Don't bother making notes on this because you don't ever need to know it again, but it's good to have the picture of where this all comes from. So Rene Descartes, ever heard of him? Philosopher in the 15th century, 16th century, brought up a very important thinking process. We are to doubt everything. There's only one way we can be certain about anything. So he began questioning the world. And how do we know what we know? How do we truly know what we know? And he came up with a famous statement, I think, therefore I am. And this began the birth of psychology. If I can think and have measurable kind of thoughts, I can reflect on my thinking, I therefore exist. And that's the starting point of existence. I think, therefore I am. Also created the split between the mind and the body. Up until then, nobody ever considered us as having a mind. You were a person. There wasn't a thing called the mind up until then. The concept of having a mind, that you have a thought process that is separate from who you are in terms of your body, was very significant. Yeah. Yes. Mind is not tangible, can't hold it, can't dissect it, can't see it. Yes, it's present. You are your mind. But without your body, you're not. You don't exist. So who are you? So that's caused that split between the mind-body split. Up until then, everything else was down to God. John Locke, English philosopher, came along, building on that, saw the mind as receptive and passive, and he developed what he called the tabula rasa, which is Latin for the blank slate. Tabula, the slate, rasa, blank. The blank slate. That the world writes on your tabula rasa and molds you. So he started which big debate. If you're born blank and the world impacts on you, what debate has he begun? Yeah, nature-nurture debate. Are you born a certain way, or are you molded? What's called the nature-nurture debate. Oh, way ahead of the game, but yes. Has. Okay? Herman Holtz, much later on, developed the first psychology lab and began the first scientific measurement of processes. So he was an engineer, a mechanist. He looked at what are the mechanisms. You know, if you push something to the edge of the table, it will fall. And he was basing things on observation, the need to test and demonstrate things. Okay? And Fenscher built on that, and he started the whole world of psychophysics, otherwise today known as neuropsychology. Looking at sensory stimulation and looking for differences and how the physical and world and your engagement with that impacts on your neurology, how the nature of your neurology determines how you are as a person. So Wilhelm Wundt is known as the father of psychology. He started the first lab in Leipzig, and he focused on what's known as consciousness. Mainly how we feel and sense and things. If I prick you with a pin, how do you react? If I put ice on you, how do you respond? Okay? And he looked at the law of introspection. By looking at and reflecting on our own responses, we get to understand who we are. So why do you like curry but not stews? Why do you like chocolate but not bananas? It's that kind of process. We're all evolved and grown in different ways, and that's what he was looking at those mental processes. And he wasn't too bad as well. He got quite a lot of things right. So now we enter some important concepts. Sorry? Psychology. The first field of psychology. That little science says psychology. Now, you need to understand the following structure in order to understand what's going to be said. Okay? We're going to be using this terminology quite frequently. Schools, theories, models, methods. They all mean different things. And it can get quite confusing. So, to use a school analogy literally, you're all in Newham. Okay? Within Newham, there are numerous theories at work. So we have psychology, counseling, business. Okay? Within each school, you can have numerous other. Within each faculty, for one way, or theory, you will have numerous other theories. Okay?
What's the three symbols after theory?
Just
No, the one after.
so these are the kinds of theories that there might be. And I'm using the college here as a physical example, as a demonstration. So we've got psychology department, counseling, business, combined studies. Okay, each one of those will have numerous models and theories at play. Okay, or theories, and each theory can have more than one model. And each model can have more than one method. Okay? And this can get very confusing because what we're describing are different levels of theories, models, and methods. So this is where we come to here. The first school of psychology was structuralism. School. Okay? The next one was functionalism. BJ. It's taking a while. Okay, the one after that is behaviorism. So, if we get rid of that, and we begin looking at schools are structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, psychodynamic comes after that, humanistic, modern ones, what's known as postmodern theory schools. But that's not really a school in itself. It's neither for a moment or confusing. Okay? Those are schools. My pen is dying on me. Within each school, there are a number of theories. Within each theory, there are a number of models. Within each model, there are a number of methods. Okay? So it's important just to get your head around that idea that when we're talking about a method, it's not the same as a model theory or school. We're talking about a model, it's not the same as a school. So Freud had a number of models in his theory. His one main theory, but he has three main models. Okay? So you've got to begin thinking about the structuring of how this terminology works to make sense of it. No. This I need you to become aware of it, because I've become aware that students don't understand this breakdown. I'm adding it in for the first time. Okay? So you need to understand that there are schools, theory, models, and methods that need to be built on. So you had structuralism, again building on the psychoneurology elements, followed by functionalism, and he was using primarily Darwin's theory. Okay? So you have a school using a particular theory, William James. Okay? And then the first major school to begin making an impact was behaviorism. What's an example of behaviorism? When I say behaviorism, what comes to mind? Any idea? Ever heard of the term? Yeah, to a point. Pavlov? Yes. Pavlov. Pavlov's dogs. Ever heard of Pavlov's dogs and not the band? Yes. Yes. So he focused on observable behavior. Pavlov, mainly then followed by Watson. And the main goal of psychology be prediction and control of behavior, looking at stimulus and response. That we respond to stimuli with our behaviors, not our thoughts. So the whole idea of Pavlov's dogs, reinforcement of behavior. We'll come to that in more detail in the second half of the lecture. Okay. Then you had Mad Fritz Perls, who came along and developed Gestalt psychology, because everybody was breaking everything down, and he was saying, but hang on, you can't understand a person if you've broken them down into bits. So you understand that and you understand that, but so what? It's like in neuropsychology, everything is affected by serotonin and dopamine. For me, the question is always, so what? Yes, serotonin and dopamine are very important chemicals in the brain, but they seem to affect every behavior. So for me, the answer is, so what? So we understand that those play a role, but how do they play a role? And that's what Gestalt psychology is all about. The whole is more important than the individual elements. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, is the famous saying. Okay. Then along came Freud, turn of the century, or turn of last century, 1890s into the 1900s, and he introduced the concept of the unconscious. This is the first time that concept is introduced. We take it as a given today, but it was a radical idea in his day. It was highly, highly controversial. Okay. So please watch the movie A Dangerous Method by Jung. It's a movie about Jung, which was Freud's follower who broke away from him. A recent movie about 18 months ago it came out. So hence psychoanalysis came about. Tell me all about your childhood. Okay? Yeah, Melissa. A Dangerous Method. Yes. Yeah. Okay? Jung. Yeah, Jung. The movie is about Jung, who was part of Freud's psychodynamic and broke away from him because he disagreed with Freud around certain things and developed his own psychodynamic school called analytic psychotherapy, whereas Freud's is psychodynamic. Okay. So, in that sense, you have this development of the history of psychology coming through different levels, huge evolution through to more modern approaches now. Okay, you've got Herbert Simon and Noam Chomsky. You've probably heard the name Noam Chomsky, very famous American writer, mainly on linguistics. So if you ever do English, you end up doing linguistics, and that very important. They're looking at the brain as an information processing system, like a computer. Input, output, how's it processing, what's going on in it. Okay? And so you can break up psychology and the processes involved in the study of psychology and how we've got to where we are today in various models, but going all the way back from ancient Greece. The Greek philosophers actually had most of what we knew already. They already had it all down. And then you got the parallel of the physical sciences happening at the same time as the human sciences. And so they were influencing each other. But primarily the physical sciences like Isaac Newton, maths, measurement, physics, was beginning to influence very strongly. Okay, so that's the whistle-stop tour of the history of counseling and psychology. But counseling, where did it develop from? Where did counseling come from? No. Humanistic field developed after the Second World War. And Rogers played a very important role in that, and we'll speak about Rogers in more detail. But up until the 1950s, training as a psychotherapist, or rather a psychoanalyst, you had to be a medical doctor first, trained as a psychiatrist. That's 14 years of work, training. Then you specialize as a psychoanalyst after you've had a minimum of 4 years of your own daily psychoanalysis. It's really a closed shop field. And they were the psychoanalysts of the day. That was Freud's model. You had to be a doctor because Freud was a neurophysicist. He was a neurologist in today's terms. So he was working from the medical point of view. And to be able to be called a psychotherapist or psychoanalyst or whatever, you had to have that level of training, which meant it was very limited. And Rogers, in his days at university, realized that there are a lot of people who could be helped without having to have all that medical training. But they couldn't practice or call themselves psychotherapists, so he called them counselors. And so the field of counseling was born. And there's a split also. When Freud came to the UK, the training model also shifted in that you have psychotherapists. So what's the difference between a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, and a counselor? Okay, we'll talk a bit about that in the seminar. So think about those different professions all using the same thing. Carl Rogers. So, looking at behaviorism, give me a dozen healthy infants, and on my own world, bring them up in, I'll guarantee to take one at random, train him to be any kind of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, beggar, man, or thief. It was Watson. No. No. He did little Albert. Okay, One way to begin to think of things is to use mind maps, people. This is a mind map of behaviorism. When you get a huge amount of complex data, map it out in a way that works for you. There's lots of free apps and software out there for mind mapping, or you can literally just draw it on a large piece of paper and stick it up on your wall. Okay? But it helps break down the different elements that are involved in an area, and also for your essay writing later on. Mind map your essay, and you'll have a better assignment. Okay? So, this is the school of behaviorism, within which you have classical conditioning, operant conditioning, are the two main approaches, but there's particular ways in which they've been expanded upon. Okay? So it started with Pavlov, went to Skinner, okay, and Skinner and his operant and classical conditioning were part of the important key concepts. So Pavlov worked on dogs, but he actually wasn't a psychologist. He was a biologist. What he was studying was the saliva production in dogs. And he happened to find the classical conditioning process. Okay? So there are a number of YouTube videos embedded in here where you can watch in your own time to clarify. He was a biologist. He was wondering how much saliva is secreted, where is it secreted from. This is 1900. Okay? 1890s to 1900s. That's what biologists do. I had a friend who was an ichthyologist. He studied fish. And he spent his whole master's year counting the teeth of fish. Because that's what his research was on. Don't ask me, but in here, each to his own. So, what Pavlov found was, when the food arrives, the dogs would salivate. So they would see their food bowls being organized, and they would begin drooling. Just like yourself, you're walking past McDonald's and it's like, oh, okay, or whatever your favorite food stuff. There's an automatic reaction. Then he found, actually, if he paired the food with a stimulus, he got the same reaction. So he began to link an external element, a trigger, with what would normally cause it, and you still get salivation, and eventually just the trigger would cause the same response that the food would cause. Classical conditioning. And this works on instinctual behavior. Okay? Bell would cause you to drool. Yeah, ding! And then he fed the dog. Ding! And he fed the dog. And because then the dog would smell the food and see the food, it would salivate. To drool. And eventually you could just ring the bell and the dog would start drooling in anticipation for food. Even when there's no food in sight. Now think of what you've done with your children. I would be playing out on the field with my mates, and I would hear a bell and say, I have to go home. And my mate said, why? My mum called. She just rang a bell. She didn't shout. We knew if we didn't get home, we got beaten. So you went home. As soon as you heard the bell, you went home. Classical conditioning. Sorry, gotta go, guys. And you do it all the time without realizing, particularly with your kids. If you've got animals, you do it with your animals all the time. Think of dog trainers. How do they get at crafts, get those dogs to do what they do? It's classical conditioning. Reward, stimulus, trigger. If I do this, you come here. If I do this, it's here. If I go that, it's run away. It's stimulus. It's pure classical conditioning. Nanny 911 is classical and operant conditioning. Okay? So you need to understand these terms and the process. So look at the videos. Watson followed on and he did Little Albert. It's a YouTube on about Little Albert, where he traumatized poor Little Albert for life. Okay? And what he demonstrated was the generalization of classical conditioning to a range of other elements. Little Albert was given a rabbit to cuddle, a nice furry furs, and then he had a large bell go off behind him. Which, of course, what are you going to do to a 6-month-old little baby? It's going to traumatize him. So every time he touched the rabbit, the bell went off. So what would he eventually do? Yeah, you're not going to touch it. Because every time I touch it, something bad happens to me. Hence, I'm not going near that. And anything furry is obviously dangerous. So fur coats, and scarves, and gloves, I'm not going to go near them. So that's how you develop phobias. Well done, Anita. And that's how phobias are developed. Classical conditioning and ongoing reinforcement of the condition. So this is how you begin to see how psychology informs on counseling. So classical conditioning can be used as either aversion therapy or developed and utilized within cognitive behavior therapy. Not just cognitive therapy, but you have the behavior component in CBT. Okay? Think of advertising. It's pure classical conditioning for the most part, along with other suggestive ideas, but a lot of advertising is based on. Eventually a brand is so known to you, you only have to see its logo and you know what it's about. But there are some adverts of late I've seen, it's like, what are they advertising? It's a bit lost on me. But Skinner came along and he developed, within behaviorism, he developed operant conditioning. Using rats and pigeons, we learn through reinforcement or punishment. Okay? And this is very important to know these principles as well. You do need to know them and understand them properly. So, positive reinforcement is something that's nice, that encourages or strengthens behavior. So praise, well done, good, sweetie. The dog getting the biscuit. It encourages what you want the person to do. It strengthens the behavior. Negative reinforcement is you taking something unpleasant away which strengthens the behavior. It encourages the behavior you don't want. So little Johnny, miss in the corner, and the teacher goes, yes, Johnny. Yeah, what she's just done is a negative reinforcement. He can't hold himself for a moment to be able to let the teacher finish what she has to say. So she's reinforcing and encouraging the very behavior she doesn't want, rather than reinforcing the behavior that she does want. When he does sit still and put his hand up and wait, Johnny, that was very good. Now you had a question, what was that? That's a positive reinforcement. But if she just responds to his jumping up to keep him shut up because he's disrupting the class, she's doing a negative reinforcement. Okay? And then you have punishment is something negative, aversive, which weakens behavior. You go through red traffic light, you get £100 fine. Are you going to do that again in a hurry? No. That's the classical spanking. That's what fines and courts are based on. It's based on punishment, not the encouragement of the behavior we want. So it's important to understand these concepts because it's important to understand these with clients and how some of their behaviors are reinforced, or how you might unwittingly negatively reinforce a behavior you're actually trying to get rid of, but what you're doing is you're encouraging it. Okay, so watch Nanny 911 or Super Nanny and all of those. This is primarily what they're using is operant conditioning. They're just intuitively tuned in to what are the reinforcers. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning. Operant being the operation, the behavior. He called it operant. So on the bottom of the slide, of this slide as well, there are 2 YouTube links that you can go and look at and see the pigeon in action. Where he could get a pigeon to tap the right letter to get fed. Okay, so he used it a lot in controlling behavior. So, as I say, dog control, training. I mean, that is not natural behavior of dogs, or to sit on a chair quietly. Where do you see a pack of dogs doing that? Okay, they've been trained through operant conditioning, and that's what we use all the time. Think of yourself. You come to traffic lights. They turn red. What do? You stop. You've been trained. So again, a kind of mind map. Behaviorism looks at what we can see and change. There's 2 main types, classical and operant. So Watson and Pavlov are classical, and Skinner is operant conditioning. Then, related to the school of behaviorism, Albert Bandura, comes along, he agreed with the 2 theories, but argued that we learn by observation as well. We learn by looking. We learn by watching. Okay? And we learn from models. And he had a famous experiment called the Bobo doll experiment, where he had children watch somebody kick, beat, throw around a large plastic doll, and then watched what they did afterwards. And they copied the behaviors, depending on what the person modeled. Even sweet little girls would end up kicking it, shooting it, and killing it, if that's what they had been observed. But if they observed the person being nice to it and calming and sweeting to it. Good morning, Curtis. You're not in this class, Curtis. I'm busy teaching. I can't help you right now. Go and ask one of the student learning engagement officers downstairs. Okay. So, who are we mostly likely to learn from? Same-sex models who show gender-appropriate behavior, and that's very culturally specific. You know, what a man does, what a woman does, depends on your culture. Models who are reinforced for their behavior, high-status models, significant models. Okay? So, Beckham. How many of kids want to be Beckham? Or whoever's the favourite one, Rooney. Who's the favourite footballer amongst the kids now? I don't know. Okay? Or the singers. They imitate, they follow, they copy. They do the same with you. Think of your kids and when they have embarrassed you because they've just done your behavior. Kids copy all the time. We all learn by modeling. So it raises the question, does TV or gaming, which are violent games, cause kids to be violent? Okay. Do all these video shoot 'em up movie games, fighting games cause kids to be aggressive and violent? Or not? The question remains unanswered. It's variable. But why are some and not others? Why are some influenced and others aren't? There's millions of kids who play these games, but only 1 or 2 go off and replicate them. in real life? Don't know. So, what are the strengths of behaviorism? It's fairly scientific because it only looks at observable behavior. It doesn't try and imagine what's going on in the mind. It looks at what happens and how the person responds. It doesn't try to infer the black box, as they call it, the mind, the unknown, the unseeable element. It has lots of practical applications. So what's known as systematic desensitization, flooding, progressive relaxation are all various kinds of techniques that they use to deal with phobias. And it highlighted the importance that the environment plays on behavior. Yeah. If you think of schools, large schools, how do they control kids' behavior and get them going? Come on in, Kira. Think of the old-fashioned school bell. You know, that's a marker of time, place. When the bell goes, right, it means you go to your next lesson, or it's now break time, or whatever. That's a form of environmental control. Think of ourselves when you're walking along the pavement and you're going into the tube. How is your behavior controlled? There's maps, there's stairwells, there's blocked off areas. You're tunneled and channeled and guided in this way, out that way. Yeah? We all stand on the right of the escalator on the tube because that's what's done. It's classical learned behavior that's reinforced over and over and over again. Okay? What are some of its weaknesses? It ignores the mental cognitive thinking. It doesn't take that into account, how people think about things. It's fairly reductionistic, as it only focuses on the environment and doesn't really consider biological influences. Okay? So if somebody's psychotic, it's not taking that into account. They're seeing a behavior and its response. But if that person is psychotic and thinks the telephone wires are talking to him and telling him to go and do this, okay? And can we really compare animals and humans? Are you a rabbit? Yeah. We are different ideas and processes at play around that. Okay. So, what we'll go and get them in a moment, are readings for each week to look at. Okay. What you'll find is this chapter, there will be an overlap in some of the readings. You'll get more than one reading that covers the area because different authors will write different ideas about the same thing. So this is not about just doing a single reading and getting the content. It's about understanding the content from different points of view. And that's what getting an academic degree is about. You're getting different points of view. Important just to give you an overview of where we are in counseling. It was 14 years ago. It's a bit out of date, but I can't find a more recent one. Okay. You'll find I've got, so a lot of these are covering the same kinds of things, but have a look at them. There's also links to more advanced readings, so those of you who want to get a first need to do the advanced readings as well. If you do the core readings, you will pass. If you do them well, you get a reasonably good pass. But if you do some of the advanced readings, you will get better marks. Okay? Come to that now in the process. Okay? So these are the kinds of advanced readings that you would look at and get a sense of. So, there's quite a lot of readings to be done in any degree course. When Freud met Pavlov's dog. If you understand this joke, you'll understand the inference. What was Freud famous for? Anybody, any idea what that is? Yeah, but what is that card? It's the Rorschach ink blot test. He just had a bunch of ink blots put together, and he would show them to clients, and he said, "What do you see in this?" Spider, bat, whatever, and that's called projection, and that's your unconscious coming out. Okay? He's showing Pavlov's dog, who is the bell and food, the Rorschach thing. So what do you see when you see this? I see that.